What if the person sleeping next to you for the 20 years was hiding a secret so big it could destroy everything? What if your best friend, the one you trusted the most, was the one helping them betray you? Lisa had no idea she was living a lie until the night she exposed it all in front of an entire neighborhood. And trust me, it didn't end there. Stay with me, because this story only gets darker. If you love true crime, betrayal, and justice served cold, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in Lisa's place? The street party was in full swing. Laughter echoed between the houses. Children ran through the yards, and the smell of grilled food filled the air. It was the kind of evening that made the neighborhood feel like a family. People stood in small groups, chatting, holding drinks, completely unaware that everything was about to change. Lisa stood near the drinks table, watching her husband Mark. He was laughing, one hand casually holding a beer, the other resting too comfortably on Emily's shoulder. Emily, their next-door neighbor, smiled up at him. It was subtle, but Lisa saw it now. How Emily leaned in just a little too much. How Mark's fingers brushed against her skin in a way that wasn't friendly. Lisa's grip tightened around her wine glass. She had spent years swallowing her suspicions, years convincing herself that she was imagining things. She wasn't imagining anything. She knew the truth now, and tonight, so would everyone else. She cleared her throat and tapped her glass with a spoon. The sound rang out, sharp and unexpected, cutting through the noise. Conversations died down, heads turned. The music played on for a few seconds before someone turned it off. The street fell silent. Mark's smile faded. He looked at Lisa, confused at first, then uneasy. Emily's fingers curled around her drink, her knuckles white. Tom, Emily's husband, stood beside her, oblivious, still laughing at something someone had said a moment ago. He hadn't noticed the tension. Not yet. Lisa took a slow breath and smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile people expected. It was cold, steady. Her heart pounded, but her voice didn't shake. "Since we're all here," she said, her tone light but deliberate, "I think it's the perfect time to share something I've recently learned." Mark took a step forward. "Lisa." She held up a hand, stopping him. "No, Mark. You had your time to talk. It's my turn now." People shifted uncomfortably, sensing something serious was coming. Lisa looked at Emily, then at Tom. He still didn't understand. "For 20 years," Lisa continued, her eyes never leaving her husband, "Mark and Emily have been having an affair." A sharp gasp broke through the crowd. A woman put her hand over her mouth. Someone whispered, "No way." The air turned thick, heavy, waiting for what would happen next. Mark's face drained of color. He shook his head quickly, a forced laugh slipping out. "Lisa, stop this." Lisa ignored him. "I was stupid. I trusted my husband. I trusted my best friend." She turned to Emily. "How many times, Emily? How many lies did you tell Tom? How many nights did you meet my husband while I was home alone, thinking he was working late?" Tom finally reacted. His face twisted in confusion. He turned to Emily, searching for an answer, but she said nothing. She looked frozen, her eyes darting from Lisa to Mark. Lisa pulled her phone from her pocket and tapped the screen. "I could tell you how I found out, but I think it's better if I just show you." She turned the phone screen toward the crowd. The message thread was open, dozens of texts, some old, some recent. Some were innocent at first glance, plans to meet, small jokes, but then there were others. Explicit, emotional, undeniable. Mark lunged forward. "Lisa, stop it!" Tom's face went red. He snatched the phone from Lisa's hand, eyes scanning the screen. His hands shook. The crowd around them stood frozen, waiting. Emily's voice came out in a whisper. "Tom, please." But Tom wasn't listening anymore. He looked up at Mark, his chest rising and falling in sharp breaths. Then, without warning, he swung his fist. The crack of his knuckles hitting Mark's jaw echoed through the stunned silence. Mark stumbled back, knocking over a table, drinks crashing to the ground. People gasped. Someone pulled their phone out, recording. Lisa stood still, watching her husband lie on the pavement, holding his face in shock. Emily rushed to him, but Tom grabbed her arm, stopping her. "Don't," he said, his voice low and shaking. "Don't you even touch him." The weight of the moment settled over everyone, the perfect families, the perfect neighborhood. It had all been a lie. Lisa had shattered it in seconds. And she wasn't done yet. Lisa hadn't always been suspicious. For years, she had been the kind of wife who never checked her husband's phone, never questioned his late nights, never imagined that the man she built a life with could betray her. If someone had told her 5 years ago that Mark was having an affair, she would have laughed. He was a good husband, a loving father, or at least that's what she thought. But the signs had been there all along. She remembered the first time something felt off. It had been a summer evening, much like tonight. She had walked into the backyard and seen Mark and Emily talking. At first, it had seemed normal, neighbors chatting, nothing more. But then Mark had reached out, brushing something off Emily's shoulder. It was a small touch, innocent enough. But Lisa had seen the way Emily had looked at him, the way Mark had smiled. It was a split second, but something in her gut had twisted. She had ignored it, pushed it down. Then there were the late-night texts. Mark had always been on his phone, but lately he had started tilting the screen away when she walked by. When she asked who he was texting, he would shrug and say, "Just work." But work texts didn't make a man smile the way he did. One night, she had woken up to find Mark missing from bed. The house was dark, the only light coming from his office. She had stood in the hallway, watching as he sat at his desk, his phone in his hand, typing furiously. She hadn't asked him about it the next morning. She had wanted to believe it was nothing. But the doubts grew. A charge on the credit card for a hotel room. Just for a work trip, Mark had said. A faint scent of unfamiliar perfume on his shirts. The way Emily always seemed to know things about Mark that Lisa had never told her. Then there was the day she saw them. Lisa had been driving home from the grocery store when she stopped at a red light near a small cafe. She hadn't been looking for anything unusual, just waiting for the light to change. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw them, Mark and Emily. They were sitting at a table near the window, leaning close, laughing. Emily's hand rested lightly on Mark's arm. It wasn't just a friendly conversation. It was intimate. The light turned green, but Lisa didn't move. For the first time, she let herself admit what she had been denying for years. Mark was cheating on her, and not just with anyone. With Emily, with the woman she had trusted, the woman she had invited into her home. Lisa drove away that day without confronting them. She needed proof, real proof, and she was going to get it. Lisa didn't say anything to Mark that night. She cooked dinner as usual, set the table, listened as he talked about his busy day at work. She nodded, smiled at the right moments, all while knowing exactly where he had been. She started watching him more closely. Mark's schedule became her obsession. She memorized his patterns, when he left, when he came home, how long he took to respond to texts. And then there was Emily. She started noticing that whenever Mark made an excuse to leave the house, Emily disappeared shortly after. One evening, Lisa tested a theory. Mark told her he had a work dinner and left at 7:30 p.m. Lisa waited 15 minutes, then looked outside. Emily's car was gone. The next morning, Lisa casually mentioned Emily in conversation with Tom. "She was out last night, right?" she asked, watching his reaction. Tom frowned. No, she was home. Lisa forced a smile. Oh, must have been someone else's car I saw. Inside, her stomach twisted. Tom had no idea. The final piece of the puzzle came unexpectedly. Lisa had always respected Mark's privacy, but that night, as he slept beside her, she reached for his phone. His breathing was steady, deep. She knew his password. He never thought she would look. The messages were there. All of them. Years of texts. Some were casual, inside jokes, things that could have been dismissed as friendly. But then, as she scrolled further, the truth hit her like a punch to the stomach. I miss you already. Tonight was amazing. Same time next week? I can't believe we've kept this going for so long. Lisa's hands shook. She clicked on an older message, dated 10 years ago. I wish I had met you before, Lisa. Her blood turned ice cold. It wasn't just an affair. It wasn't some recent mistake. Mark and Emily had been lying to her for 2 decades. Lisa placed the phone back on the nightstand, her heart pounding. Lying next to her, Mark sighed in his sleep, shifting slightly, unaware that everything had changed. Lisa stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. She had what she needed, but this wasn't going to be a quiet confrontation. She was going to destroy him. Lisa didn't sleep that night. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to Mark breathe. Every inhale, every exhale felt like an insult. She wanted to shake him awake, shove the phone in his face, scream at him, until he had no choice but to admit what he had done. But that would have been too easy for him. He didn't deserve an argument behind closed doors. He deserved humiliation. By the time the sun came up, Lisa had a plan. She spent the next few days pretending, smiling at Mark over breakfast, kissing his cheek before he left for work, laughing at jokes that made her sick. He had no idea that every second she spent near him was calculated. She wasn't his wife anymore. She was his executioner, and he was walking blindly to the gallows. Lisa didn't just want Mark to suffer. She wanted everyone to see what he had done. She gathered evidence. She went through his emails, screenshots of their messages, hotel bookings under fake names. She found old birthday cards from Emily, ones that seemed innocent at first, until she noticed the small details. The way she signed her name with a tiny heart, the way she referenced secret memories Lisa was never a part of. She saved everything. Then she thought about Tom. Tom had been the one person who deserved to know the truth as much as she did. For years he had been Emily's fool, just like Lisa had been Mark's. She thought about telling him privately, sitting him down and laying it all out. But she knew what men like Mark and Emily did when they were cornered. They lied. They twisted the truth. If Lisa told Tom in private, he might have confronted Emily first, giving her time to come up with an excuse, a watered-down version of what really happened. No, Lisa couldn't risk that. She needed a moment that neither of them could talk their way out of. And then it hit her. The Saturn street party. Every year their block held a big summer gathering. Food, music, families coming together. Everyone would be there. A perfect, unsuspecting audience. Lisa smiled to herself. She would wait until the party was in full swing. People relaxed, happy, their guard down. And then, when Mark and Emily least expected it, she would rip their world apart in front of everyone. Lisa could already picture it. The silence that would fall over the crowd, the looks of disgust, the whispers, the gasps, the slow realization spreading through the neighborhood like wildfire. Mark and Emily wouldn't just lose their marriages that night. They would lose everything. Lisa poured herself a cup of coffee, her hands steady. For the first time in a long time, she felt calm. Mark walked into the kitchen, running a hand through his hair. "Morning," he said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. Lisa smiled up at him. "Good morning." She kissed him back, soft and slow, her lips brushing against the man she was about to destroy. The day of the street party arrived, and the neighborhood buzzed with excitement. Families set up tables, kids ran between yards, music played from speakers propped on porches. The air smelled like grilled burgers and fresh lemonade. It was the kind of evening that made life feel easy, safe. Lisa moved through the crowd, smiling, chatting, playing the role of the perfect wife. She laughed at jokes, complimented outfits, helped set up chairs. Mark was by her side, completely unaware that every step he took was leading him closer to his downfall. Emily arrived with Tom, holding a plate of cookies, her face glowing with the same false warmth she had worn for years. Lisa watched as Mark's eyes found Emily across the crowd. It was quick, barely noticeable, but Lisa saw it. She saw everything now. Mark and Emily weren't reckless. They had survived 2 decades by being careful, by making sure no one noticed the way they lingered too long in conversations or stood just close enough for their hands to brush. But now, knowing what she knew, Lisa could see the difference. The way Emily looked at Mark when Tom wasn't watching, the way Mark's body angled slightly toward her, drawn to her like a magnet, the way they avoided each other, too much, as if pretending not to know each other too well would hide the truth. It made Lisa sick. Tom, poor clueless Tom, was already 2 beers in, laughing with the neighbors. He had no idea that his life was about to change. He had no idea that the woman standing next to him, smiling like the devoted wife she pretended to be, had spent years betraying him in the worst way possible. Lisa's phone was in her pocket, the messages and pictures already pulled up. Her hand curled around it as she ran through the plan in her head. She knew exactly what she was going to say. She had rehearsed it, imagined every reaction. She had played out different versions of the moment. Mark trying to interrupt her, Emily bursting into tears, Tom's face shifting from confusion to rage. She was ready. She waited until the party was at its peak, when people were the most relaxed, their guards completely down. Then she walked toward the drinks table, picked up her wine glass, and tapped it with a spoon. The sound rang out, sharp and clear, cutting through the noise. People turned. Conversations faded. Even the music was lowered. Mark, mid-conversation, glanced toward her, his brow furrowing. Emily stiffened, fingers gripping the plate she was holding. Lisa smiled, a slow, measured smile. "Since we're all here," she said, her voice carrying through the quiet, "I think it's the perfect time to share something important." Mark's expression changed. He didn't know what was coming, not exactly, but something in her tone made him uneasy. "Lisa, what are you—" She held up a hand, stopping him. "Not this time." "I've been thinking a lot about love," she continued, her eyes never leaving Mark's face. "About marriage, about trust, about the way we build our lives around people we think we know." Emily's face went pale. Tom looked confused, glancing between Lisa and Mark, not understanding why the air had suddenly turned so heavy. Lisa reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. The screen lit up, revealing the open message thread. "I wanted to take a moment tonight to celebrate a relationship that has survived for around 20 years. That's an achievement, isn't it?" Mark's face drained of color. Emily shifted beside Tom, her breath quickening. Lisa turned the phone toward the crowd, scrolling slowly through the texts. A woman in the front gasped. A few people leaned closer. Mark stepped forward, his hand outstretched. "Lisa, put the phone down." She ignored him. "How many years, Mark?" she asked, her voice steady, cold. "How many years have you been sneaking around behind my back? How many times have you met Emily in hotels, in cars, in places where you thought no one would ever find out? A heavy silence fell over the crowd. Someone muttered, "Oh my God." Tom finally looked at the screen. His face, flushed from beer and laughter, turned blank. Then it darkened. Emily reached for him. "Tom, don't," he said, his voice low, shaking. "Don't even touch me." Lisa turned back to Mark. He wasn't laughing anymore. His jaw was tight, his fists clenched. "Lisa, we're not doing this here. We're exactly doing this here," she shot back. "You spent 20 years lying to me. 20 years." Her voice didn't crack. It didn't shake. Mark opened his mouth, but he had no words. There was nothing he could say. Then, without warning, Tom moved. His fist connected with Mark's face so hard that the sound echoed through the stunned silence. Mark stumbled backward, knocking over a table. Drinks crashed to the pavement. Someone screamed. Emily gasped, covering her mouth. Tom stood over Mark, breathing hard. "You son of a bitch," he hissed. People were recording now. The phones were out, capturing everything. Mark groaned, touching his bleeding lip. He looked up at Lisa, rage in his eyes. "You—" Lisa tilted her head. "What, Mark? Are you angry that you finally got caught?" Mark wiped his lips, slowly pushing himself up. But before he could say another word, Tom turned to Emily, and that was when the real chaos began. Emily took a step back, her hands shaking as Tom turned to face her. His eyes, wide and burning with betrayal, locked onto hers. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on the entire street. The laughter and chatter from earlier had vanished. The street party had transformed into something else entirely, a public reckoning. Tom's voice was dangerously low. "Tell me it's not true." Emily's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She blinked rapidly, her lips trembling, her mind scrambling for an escape. Lisa had seen this kind of panic before. The moment a liar runs out of lies. Tom scoffed, shaking his head. "Jesus Christ, Emily!" His voice broke on her name. He turned back to Lisa's phone, still displaying the messages. He scrolled, his breathing uneven, his jaw clenched. The evidence was there. Every meeting, every promise, every lie. Emily finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tom, please, I can explain." Tom let out a bitter laugh. "Explain? Explain what, exactly? That you've been screwing Mark for not 20 years? That I've been the idiot standing next to you while you threw our entire marriage in the trash?" Mark, still hunched over and wiping the blood from his lip, muttered, "Maybe we should all calm down." Lisa turned on him so fast that he actually flinched. "You don't get to speak. Not now." The neighbors were whispering, staring, recording. Emily's face turned red as she realized there was no escape. Lisa wasn't done. She pulled another text up on her phone and read it aloud. "I miss you already. Last night was perfect. Next time, I'll tell Tom I'm at my sister's." Tom's entire body stiffened. His hands curled into fists. Emily actually took a step back, as if preparing to run. Lisa held the phone up to Emily. "That was sent 2 weeks ago. While you were smiling at your husband, sitting next to me at my dinner table." She turned back to Mark, her voice dripping with venom. "And you? You came home that night and kissed me, told me you loved me." Mark looked away. He had nothing. No defense, no excuse. Emily's face twisted, desperate. "Lisa, please, you know this isn't all my fault." Lisa let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, you're right. I don't blame you. Alone." She turned to Mark, her eyes dark with fury. "You, my dear husband, are just as disgusting as she is." Tom exhaled sharply, his hands on his hips. He was shaking, physically shaking. Then he looked at Emily and said 6 words that crushed whatever hope she had left. "Get your things and get out." Emily's breath hitched. "Tom." He didn't even look at her. He just turned and walked away. And just like that, it was over. Mark and Lisa drove home in silence. The street party had ended in whispers, in people shaking their heads, in Emily standing frozen in the middle of the chaos she had helped create. Lisa didn't know where she had gone after Tom walked away. She didn't care. She kept her hands steady on the steering wheel, her face blank. Mark sat beside her, bruised, humiliated, and, for the first time in years, scared. The second they stepped inside the house, Mark finally spoke. "Lisa, please." She turned to face him, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Power. "Please what, Mark?" she asked, crossing her arms. "Please forgive you. Please forget that you destroyed our marriage. Please pretend that the last 20 years of my life weren't a joke." Mark ran a hand through his hair, wincing from the pain in his jaw. "It wasn't a joke." Lisa laughed, a real, cold, bitter laugh. "Then what the hell was it?" Mark swallowed hard. "I never wanted to hurt you." She narrowed her eyes. "That's funny, because you did it for 20 years. Mark exhaled sharply. "Lisa, I love you." Something inside her snapped. She lunged forward and shoved him hard. He stumbled back, his eyes wide in shock. "Don't you dare say that to me." Her voice was shaking now, but not from sadness. From rage. "You don't get to love me. You don't get to say that after everything you've done." Mark opened his mouth to speak, but she cut him off. "You lied, over and over again. You chosen her, every single time. You looked me in the eyes and lied to my face for 20 goddamn years. Do you even know what that does to a person?" Mark's eyes were glassy, his breathing uneven. "Lisa." She took a deep breath and stepped back. She wasn't going to cry, not for him. "I want a divorce." Mark's head snapped up. "Lisa, no, we can fix this." She shook her head. There was nothing left to fix. "No, Mark. You can fix your life, whatever's left of it." She walked past him, her voice flat, final. "But I'm done." Mark stood there, watching her walk away, finally realizing what he had done. He had lost. And Lisa, she had won. Lisa woke up the next morning feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Clarity. No more doubts, no more pretending, no more playing the role of a wife to a man who had disrespected her for 2 decades. She had spent years living in a lie, and now, finally, she was free. Mark wasn't in the house when she got up. His car was still in the driveway, but his side of the bed was empty. For a brief moment, she wondered if he had left, if he had packed his bags and gone to her. But then she heard it, the sound of the shower running. Good. He was still here. She walked downstairs, her movements calm, controlled. She poured herself a cup of coffee, then grabbed her phone. Time for the final step. She had already made up her mind before she even exposed him at the street party. Mark wasn't just going to lose her. He was going to lose everything. Lisa opened her laptop and pulled up the file she had prepared. Screenshots of texts, emails, proof of hotel stays, everything she had collected. She attached them to an email and typed in the recipients. Mark's boss, Mark's colleagues, Mark's parents, his siblings, his friends, and, just for good measure, Tom. She didn't add a subject line. She didn't need one. She simply wrote 2 sentences. "I thought you should know the truth about Mark. These messages should explain everything." Her finger hovered over the send button. She thought about the years she wasted, the lies, the nights she spent alone. wondering why Mark had pulled away from her, wondering if she had done something wrong. She thought about Emily, sitting in her house, probably crying, probably wondering if she could salvage her life. Then she hit send. A weight lifted off her chest. Mark walked into the kitchen a few minutes later, towel draped over his shoulder, rubbing his face. He looked exhausted, broken. "Lisa, please," he started, his voice rough. She didn't even look at him, just took a sip of her coffee, calm as ever. "You should probably check your email." Mark frowned, reaching for his phone. Lisa watched him as he unlocked it, watched as his eyes scanned the screen, watched as his face dropped. His body tensed. "What the hell did you do?" Lisa finally met his gaze, tilting her head slightly. "Oh, just told the truth, something you wouldn't understand." Mark's breathing quickened as he scrolled through the messages. He looked terrified. "My boss got the same email, yeah." She leaned back in her chair. "What do you think he'll say when he finds out you've been using company trips to sneak around with Emily? I mean, those hotel receipts are pretty clear." Mark's hands shook as he set the phone down. He didn't speak for a long time. Lisa let the silence stretch, let him sit in it. Then she stood up. "I have an appointment with a lawyer today. You can stay here until we sort things out, but after that, I want you gone." Mark swallowed hard. "Lisa, I don't—" She held up a hand. "Number, I don't care what you have to say anymore." She turned to leave, then stopped at the doorway. Without looking back, she said, "By the way, Emily got a copy too. You might want to check on her." Then she walked away, leaving him standing there, staring at the wreckage of his life. And for the first time in years, Lisa smiled. Lisa sat in her lawyer's office, her hands resting calmly on the desk, as she listened to the details of the divorce process. Words like assets, alimony, settlement floated around the room, but she wasn't nervous. Not anymore. She had spent years feeling trapped, suffocated by a marriage that had been nothing more than an illusion. Now she was in control. The lawyer, a sharp-looking woman with glasses perched on the tip of her nose, glanced over Lisa's paperwork. "Given the evidence you've provided, I don't see this being a difficult case. Your husband doesn't have much ground to stand on." Lisa smirked. No, he didn't. Mark had barely spoken to her since the email went out. After the initial explosion, him yelling, slamming doors, demanding to know why she would ruin his life, he had gone quiet. Maybe he finally understood that Bea was the one who ruined everything, or maybe he was too busy dealing with the fallout. Lisa had heard through the neighborhood that Emily had packed her things and left. She wasn't surprised. Emily had always been a coward. The second things got tough, she ran. Tom, on the other hand, had been seen throwing Emily's belongings onto the front lawn the night after the street party. A few neighbors had watched as he shattered a framed wedding photo against the pavement. Lisa had smiled when she heard that. She didn't feel guilty, not for a second. After the meeting, Lisa drove back home. Except it didn't feel like home anymore. It was just a house, a place where she had spent years being lied to. Mark was there, sitting on the couch, staring at the TV without really watching it. His face looked hollow, exhausted. The man who had always walked with confidence, who had laughed so easily, now sat there like a ghost of himself. Lisa dropped the divorce papers onto the coffee table. He flinched at the sound. "There's nothing to fight over," she said simply. "Sign them." Mark rubbed his face, sighing. "Lisa, She shook her head. "I don't want to hear it." He looked at her then, really looked at her. "You're not even angry anymore, are you?" Lisa let out a small laugh. "Number, I'm not." She had won. Mark sat back, exhaling. "I lost everything. Lisa tilted her head. Yeah, you did. She turned away, walking toward the door, but before she stepped outside, she paused. By the way, she said, looking back at him, you should probably move out soon. The neighbors don't like you much anymore. Then she left. Lisa stood on the front porch of her new apartment, coffee in hand. It wasn't a big place, not like the house she had shared with Mark, but it felt right, simple, clean. Hers. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her, a message from Tom. Drinks tonight. She smiled, not because of some romantic idea, not yet, but because for the first time in a long time, she had choices. She wasn't trapped anymore. Lisa picked up her cup, took a sip, and looked out at the sunrise. She had spent 20 years in the dark, but now she was finally free.